Right. So, good morning, everyone. Welcome to week 7. It's got to be a good feeling. We're at the end of the semester. I know I am also a student as well, and so I very much look forward to the end of the semester as well because I am also in your shoes. So, Shannon, I'm going to mute you real quick if that's all right.
I'm sorry about that. Yes, go ahead, please.
Oh yeah, no worries. There's just a lot of like background noise almost. Okay, so outside of the classroom, not a lot going on. I did provide some links here. So the cybersecurity NIST cybersecurity framework is there. Some social engineering words to kind of BOLO or be on the lookout for. Some digital forensic SANS media. We talked about PKI, I think it was last week, and here's a video made by Professor Messer, who is the man if you're studying for any of the CompTIA certifications. There's also just a general video on cryptography and Diffie Hellman key exchange. We're going to mention like sinkholes today. There's some additional reading there on that if you're interested. Um, General vulnerability in ActiveX, and then beacon analysis, which is more like network analysis, but I thought I would throw it out there. So one call out for final exam. It is open, and you're welcome to take it whenever you want. It's 100 questions. You get 4 hours to take the exam. It's all multiple choice. Nothing. It should be a surprise. I will tell you the questions are not recycled from the previous exam, so it's going to be new questions. And I would say that the final exam is more. The questions are going to be a little bit more lengthy. They're going to be almost like more scenario based than probably what you've seen before, so that we can really get a demonstration of your knowledge that you've retained. And again, just like any other exam, it's open book, open note, open Google, right? You just can't collaborate with other students. And so make sure, I would at a minimum have all of the PowerPoints open when I go to take the exam. Any notes that you may have, and then, Google is certainly going to be your friend as well, in a pinch. So that being said, let's look at week 7. So this is your week 7 outcomes. There's a little bit of reading in chapter 11, but the PowerPoint itself is going to be a combination of review and a little bit of new topics kind of sprinkled in there, right? So it's not going to be like completely new material, or like the first couple slides we cover cyber actors, right? And so that's because one, it's really important to build that foundation and that understanding, but also just as a review before we go into the final exam. So please plan accordingly because you do have the final exam that's open until December 11th at 11:59 Arizona time. And then the program assessment quiz is open till December 11th as well, due at 11:59 Arizona time. And then the week 7 quiz, okay, is also going to be due December 8th. So you get a couple more days on the final exam and the program assessment quiz, but they're all three kind of sandwiched together. So please plan accordingly because after the final exam, I can't be, the university doesn't allow me to be messing around with like extensions, okay? Unless it is such an extreme circumstance that the dean of students sends me an official like emergency request, okay? And so if it comes December 12th and you're asking for some sort of extension on the final exam, it's not going to happen, okay? I have within 48 hours, I have to submit final grades. And so December 11th is a Wednesday. If I don't have my grades in on Friday, then that starts affecting me, right, in my job. So again, please, please, please plan accordingly. All right. So let's take a look at week 6. I have two things I do want to bring up here. Overall class average, not bad. 92.69. That's very high, I would say, across for an exam, especially with this many students in this class. Looking across the questions, there's two that I want to address. One, I've given this question back to you guys, and it was the one on covert channel. I was revamping this class over the summer. I meant to build in a slide for covert channel. I didn't, nor did I even talk about it. And so while you guys have Google available to you, it probably wasn't super clear on what I was looking for. And so ultimately, that's not your fault. I gave everyone that question back. Now, the next one is question 45 here. And I'm kind of surprised, to be honest with you, that this one had such low scoring, and it came in at like 55 something. But this says when implementing encryption at a large organization, right? So automatically, that's a key term, right? Large, right? When we talked about symmetric and asymmetric, symmetric, you have a ton of keys, doesn't scale well, right? We mentioned that multiple times during the lecture last week. Many factors to consider. Encryption should occur quickly. That is blanket really for anything, right? Quickly, asymmetric or symmetric is going to be fast to the end user. And I think I mentioned that multiple times as well. Be scalable. Symmetric's not, right? I mentioned that probably 100 times. And then offer high levels of security. Both are going to offer high levels of security. It depends on the algorithm you're using, right? Ultimately. But due to these requirements, which type of encryption would you recommend to be implemented? Just due to the scalability of a large organization, you got to go with asymmetric. And ultimately, again, some level of hybrid is going to be implemented. But, face value, we don't have, the key management for millions of keys is not going to be feasible. So that's why this is asymmetric. Hopefully that makes a little bit more sense. I'll pause real quick in case anybody here has any questions, comments, or concerns on any of the quiz questions. And then for those of you that are watching asynchronously, please feel free to shoot me an email if you do have a question.
For that question that people got mostly wrong, I think what if I got it wrong, I think what would happen for me is reading. I probably a problem with reading and not seeing words properly would have caused me to got that question wrong. And then when I went back to the slides to see the differences between asymmetrical and symmetrical, I probably would have seen certain wording in the slides that told me that one of them would have been more effective than the other, such as the scalability was the obvious factor, but when you see
Yeah.
the other word choices as well, it would have told you that the other one had uh more of the proper means to an end, or what wording should be used there.
Got you. Okay. Yeah, I mean, so I did build into these slides that asymmetric scales well. And where in the heck is symmetric? There we go. Does not scale well. Both are very ubiquitous types of encryption, right? They're not, so it comes down again to the individual algorithm being used on how secure and how fast it's going to be. But, taking at face value, if you're using modern algorithms, which in most cases, the average user doesn't have a lot of wiggle room to mess with anyways. It's going to be transparent on how secure it is because AES, again, to my knowledge, at least hasn't been broken. And then, for any asymmetric encryption, utilizing modern algorithms, that's not going to be broken either. And so, I don't know. Hopefully that kind of answers that question a little bit. I mean, I could certainly see maybe if you're reading fast, like it might trip you up. I don't know. That's just my thoughts on it.
Yeah, I understand it better now.
Okay, good. Yeah, that's the important part. Because I tell you what, if you're in the cyber program and you intend to move forward, like this is going to be something that you're going to see over and over and over and over again. Whether you're in this program or if you're studying for certifications, like encryption is like a key pillar of cybersecurity, right? Because it all comes back to the confidentiality part in the CIA triad. And I mean, like you don't necessarily have to go in depth on the math to be able to get through any of the academic stuff for encryption. But you certainly need to know, like if you're working at an organization, let's say you're working at a Deloitte or a Big Four and you're looking at consulting for another organization and they're like, oh, well, we want to implement some sort of encryption. What should we go with? Like, you know, you should immediately be like, oh, I know what asymmetric is. I know what symmetric is. I know that for symmetric, AES is the de facto right now, and that's what we should be using. And then we have some options for asymmetric, I would say it would probably be a good thing to log in the back of your head the fact that ECC is for like less computationally intense CPUs, right? Whereas, I mean, you can use Elgamal, DSA, RSA, or Diffie-Hellman in a lot of different situations. And you don't have to be an expert on that, but you should know at face value what kind of those are and the modern algorithms in use today. All right. So let's go ahead and drive. because I do have to wrap this up before one because I have a meeting with a student. But so week 7, cyber attacks, defenses, and laws. Remember, again, this is our agenda. Some of this is going to be review. Some of it is going to be new material kind of sprinkled in there. So let's start out with cyber actors. Like we have script. So this is kind of on a spectrum, the way this is laid out. Script kiddies being like the lowest end of the spectrum, like less sophisticated. These are people who are just trying to like, I think the verbiage on here is like gain street cred, right? But like these people have no idea how the programs they're using work. They're just usually trying to like be malicious to someone or think it's funny and they're mailing stuff out. And in some instances, when we talked about Trojanizing stuff, like you don't even need a lot of skills, right? As long as you have that wrapper or binder, you can take a good program and malicious code that you can just get literally anywhere and throw it into the wrapper and it does all the work for you. And then you just email it out, right? There's not a lot of know-how on needing how to do that stuff. So again, script kiddie is 0 level of sophistication. They're just using what's available. White hats are going to be like companies or individuals that you hire to come in, do security assessments, vulnerability assessments, whatever it is, but you hire them to do a security related function. Black hats have they have their own level of sophistication. They can range from just barely above script kiddie all the way to nearly nation state actor level, right? Where they have very sophisticated private groups that they operate in. There's been many stories of like groups of people renting out commercial office space and it looks like a legitimate business, but they're literally in there wreaking havoc, getting into systems, stealing money, stealing credentials, all kinds of stuff. And so black hats are kind of, when you think that term, the level of sophistication is higher than script kiddies. In some cases, they can build their own programs, their own exploits, vulnerabilities, exploitation, I should say, and just have a much better knowledge base and resources. Hacktivists, they're not necessarily hell-bent on, I don't want to say wreaking havoc because it can be, but breaking things per se. They're more so focused on pushing some sort of, usually a political agenda. Now, the example that I typically give here is let's say like someone who loves diesel engines and has a vendetta against, let's say, Tesla, will go to their website, find a vulnerability that they could exploit, get in, and then write something on the Tesla webpage so that when the users log into the Tesla website, all they see is diesel smoke till I'm broke, right? Or something like that. Again, trying to push some sort of like message, not necessarily like worried about stealing credentials or anything like that. They just want to put their message out in front of people. Now, insider threats, I think I told you guys when we talked about this slide in like week 1, your cyber education is going to push this whole thing where insider threats are the biggest thing that you got to focus on. And, again, I'm here to tell you like, while the insider threat, I do acknowledge, can cause more catastrophic damage because they have insider knowledge of how the organization works, the insider threat, the FBI did a study on this. The average organization faces an insider threat once every 20 years. Now, I would venture to say that that might be a little bit more accelerated now today. But ultimately, if you look at the thousands, tens thousands, hundreds thousands, millions of attempts on, probing companies daily, like that is the bigger threat. So nation state actors, you're likely not going to hear that term. What you will hear is advanced persistent threat. And advanced persistent threats have a very high degree of sophistication. Now, it really depends on their TTPs or tactics, techniques, and procedures on how they operate. But some will be very quiet and stay in an organization for months and months and months before they're finally found out, because that's their motive, right? Is that they want to be quiet. They want to steal information when they can, but they're going to be very opportunistic about it. They're going to live in the network for as long as possible. And then you have others that like they just want to watch the world burn, right? And they get in, they wreak as much havoc as possible, stealing stuff, exfiltration, deleting, whatever it is, right? They're there again to just watch the world burn, and they do that. So again, wide spectrum there, but the thought there on an advanced persistent threat or nation state actor is that they have a ton of resources, right? Think this is like a a country sponsored group, right? North Korea, literally every country has their own, but like government employees, if you will, very highly trained, nearly unlimited resources and money, kind of carrying out the bidding of their country. Now, that's not always the case for an advanced persistent threat. There might be like a legitimate group that's not necessarily sponsored by the government that that goes out and carries out highly sophisticated level attacks. But for the most part, advanced persistent threats are going to be state sponsored, so to speak. All right. So cyber activities can be categorized as malicious or non-malicious, and we see, these are pretty straightforward here. One thing that I'll point out under the malicious here is that crime as a service. You can literally pay people to carry out attacks on your behalf. There was a website there for a long time you could pay. I want to say it was called like the Cyber Cannon or something like that, where you would pay, tell them the target that you wanted to hit, and they would launch DDoS attacks for you on that website. Ion Cannon was what it was called. So let's get into the hacker mindset. Well, these programs are built with known limits, so to speak, right? In the Marine Corps, we call these left and right lateral limits. And so this is what the program is supposed to do. But we know that developers don't think of everything, right? They build the program in the way it's intended to run, and they cannot forecast all the different ways an end user could potentially use that program, right? Which is where vulnerabilities end up being present, right? And so that's the hacker's ability is like, hey, we have this known, but let's figure out where we can operate in the unknown and then cause unintended actions, right? And then expand those systems' capability to be able to mine information, carry out malicious activity, watch what people are doing. It really depends on what their end motive is, but this is where they're going to operate in the expanded capability set of that program that the developers could not have foreseen being used that way. Now, I think we talked about backdoors and trapdoors, and where developers will intentionally build in kind of like a way to subvert the security system of the software so that they can go in and add lines of code or modify lines of code. And sometimes due to commercial off-the-shelf software and the need to rush that to market, they don't end up extracting that. And so that's not necessarily malicious on the developer's part. I would say there's a lot of failures along the way, and a lot of that being deadlines and maybe QA management there. But that does happen as well. And so, it's not that the developers intentionally trying to give unintended access to people, but sometimes it's needed to be able to modify lines of code so that you can do that quickly and efficiently. And they're supposed to take that out, but they don't.
Professor, would you say
Yeah.
the issue? Would you say that would be the fault of the DevSecOps? I don't catch that one.
Yeah, so a great question. It depends on the organization, right? And if they even have a DevSecOps, because what should happen is that the developers, once they're done, there should be like a whole testing process that the code should have to go through, where DevSecOps is, making sure that we're utilizing secure coding practices. But again, when you have commercial off-the-shelf software, a lot of the times the deadlines imposed by the company are nearly unrealistic to the individual developer. And if it's not a mature company like Microsoft, then there may not even be a DevSecOps team. And it might even fall within the responsibilities of ProdSec, and where ProdSec and DevSecOps need to work together to be able to provide a comprehensive picture to the developers and say, hey, fix this. And then even so, you may find organizations that are like, okay, we acknowledge that ProdSec and DevSecOps found issues here, but guess what? We got to ship it. So ship it, we'll patch it later. And that actually happens very, very often. And that's a terrible mindset to have, because the sheer volume of malicious actors out there are going to find it nearly instantaneously, and then begin to take advantage of it. Does that kind of answer your question, Shannon? I know that was a little long-winded, but does that help?
Yes, it does.
Okay, good. All right, so let's get into cyber attacks. So broadly speaking here, we have client-side attacks, we have social engineering attacks, and network-based attacks. Client-side attacks, actually, let me back up. Social engineering is going to be the most effective. right? Because humans are inherently somewhat trusting, and social engineering tries to prey upon that human behavior. Client-side attacks are going to be the next most favorable option for a malicious actor because it's relatively easy, right? The example I give here is that like HR, their job is basically to look at random files or resumes of people all day. And so, or not, you know what I mean? Like not that's not their job all day, but you know what I'm saying. So, if someone laces a Microsoft Word or Adobe PDF file with malware, they go to open that, hopefully all of the controls that they have the organization catch that. But if not, then hey, that computer is now infected. Hopefully it's not going to spread it, super fast throughout the network, but it depends on what just got opened, right? So client-side attacks pretty easy. Network-based attacks, like you're literally trying to find like a misconfiguration, maybe like an easy password or default password in an edge device. Not that these things don't happen, because they absolutely do. However, this is the path of most resistance in terms of attack. So let's look at client-side attacks. I kind of mentioned this, like, rely on vulnerabilities inherent in human action, right? Like, if your job is to take a look at resumes, and you're opening up random files, and again, this is face value, not a lot of compensating controls or even controls in place. And, someone opens up, a malware laced document, like you just bypassed everything there. And you may be thinking like, well, what about an organization that's scanning, as emails come in for stuff like that? If you recall, I should have mentioned this last week, but like, scanning stuff and even CPUs can't process encrypted information. It has to be decrypted before it can be processed. And so let's say you encrypt your resume and provide a password to the HR rep. Well, the scanning software is not going to be able to scan that until it's open. And then once it's open, depending on the attack, it might already be successful. Who knows? But two of the most common file types out there are going to be Microsoft Office, which is the entire suite, Excel, PowerPoint, Word, so on and so forth, and then Adobe PDF files. And both of these are incredibly vulnerable applications. We're going to talk about that a little bit more here in a second. But also, weaponization is super easy, right? Like, look at all of these different tool sets, and I would say Metasploit probably being one of the best out there, and you're going to get experience on Metasploit in this program. But this is like a Swiss Army knife in a lot of different ways. But again, the main takeaway here is that there's a lot of different pieces of software out there that can help you weaponize Office and PDF files. So when you look at Office files, right, this stat is a little old. I think I updated this during the summer or maybe even last summer. I don't recall. But 658 known CVEs for Microsoft Office files. That's a lot. And if you go out to this website, in fact, let's just go visit it and see what the current stat is. Sorry, guys. I'm like battling a cold. And so I know it's probably super annoying that I keep like clearing my throat, but if I don't, I'm going to be struggling. All right. So 841 is the new stat here for Microsoft Office, and it gives you a breakdown by year as well as the type of vulnerability. So this is a pretty cool site to take a look at. Maybe even something you save in case you're writing a paper and you need some stats and you need to be able to cite something. Again, good website here. So some of this isn't, you don't need to commit this to memory, but like Microsoft Word files are incredibly complex, right? And they kind of break it up into some different categories, being mainstream, summary information stream, table stream, data stream, XML storage, and then a bunch of optional streams. But all of that is basically to say like, hey, Microsoft Office and Microsoft Word in general, they have a lot of features. And every time you add a feature, whether that's copy, paste, insert, it literally does not matter. You're expanding your attack footprint, right? And that's just more code that you have to maintain, make sure it's secure. And once vulnerabilities are found, right, because developers build this thing to do what this thing and what it's supposed to do, but then hackers like to expand that capability. And, again, huge attack footprint because it has so many capabilities. So 4 different ways you can weaponize Office files: utilizing VBA And there's a class that I took in my PhD program where we leveraged VBA macros to it was benign, but open calculator on someone's computer, that opened this Microsoft Excel file. And while that's super benign and you're probably saying that's kind of lame, you can see how dangerous that could be, right? You could have built the VBA to say, hey, open command prompt, open regedit, delete X, Y, and Z. You know what I'm saying? So just by opening a file, it automatically does whatever you want it to do. And Flash programs, JavaScript, both are known to be incredibly vulnerable. And then just embedding other different types of malware straight into the file itself. Adobe PDF, same thing, right? We see 8 types of objects here. Again, this is the same thing. Like, you don't need to commit this to memory. This is just to show, like, hey, there's a lot behind the scenes on how they build these programs because of the capability that's needed. And it all represents an attack surface, and it's all something that's being analyzed by malicious actors all the time. So there's 5 different techniques you can use to weaponize Adobe PDF. JavaScript and Flash again, right? PDF launch functions where you can literally pass parameters to the command prompt. Go to actions where you redirect people to malware or malicious links, which you can also do in Microsoft Word. And then encrypting PDF files, which you can also do on Microsoft Word or most Office Suite products as well. The other thing about PDF actions, and really you can do the same thing on any Microsoft Office thing, is you can make chainable features, right? Where maybe the file itself is laden with malware, but it's also going to redirect you out to another site that installs a command and controls beacon on the node itself, and then now it's reaching out to a command and control to be able to gather information while also executing whatever the malware payload is, right? So like you could chain events together for sure. So 1,291 was, at the time of writing of this, the amount of CVEs discovered for Adobe. Let's go just double check that now, see where we're at. So now we're at a crisp 5,881, right? Again, breaks it down by year and type of vulnerability. And then all of these vulnerabilities, most of these things like use after free, heat-based buffer overflow are going to be like memory problems. Okay. For example, like use after free, once you have freed some allocated memory space, you try and call that, what was there again, and it causes a host of issues. And a lot of these things have like a wide spectrum. It can result in a blue screen of death. It can result in information leakage. It can result in, literally crashing the system. It really depends on really a lot of factors. The operating system and how it handles errors and stuff like that. All right. Browser-based exploits. So again, the web accounts for like most of the malware proliferation out there, and most of that is going to come from email, right? But an easy way to take advantage of people is through the browser, right? Whether you're using Microsoft Edge, whether you're using Internet Explorer, Google Chrome, Mozilla Firefox, like all of those things have their own vulnerability footprint, so to speak, okay? And so there are tools out there where you can take advantage of the browser itself. We call them browser exploitation packs. And some things that you can do with that is do what's called a drive-by download, right? And that doesn't even necessarily need to be like dependent upon a browser per se, but just by visiting a website, you can become infected with malware. Now, I think I mentioned in this class, and if I didn't, I apologize, but there's a tool out there called NoScript, and NoScript will literally stop any third-party code from running on a website that you visit. And if you go to like a news outlet, it's incredible how many third-party videos they're pulling from other sources, right? And I'm saying all of this because if that third party, right, that you don't control, you're just linking a video to your website, so to speak, becomes infected with something, right? Now your website's infected. And so you may not know it, but users are visiting your website. And then because you link this video to your website, which again, news media outlets do all the time, you're going to be downloading stuff potentially in the background without your knowledge and without your acceptance, really, right? Your permission, so to speak. This can absolutely happen. There's a lot of different ways it can happen. Clickjacking, Here we mentioned the 0 by 0 pixel iframe, where basically like one of the pixels on the website is queued up and ready to execute some sort of download, and you visit it and it just executes in the background. But ultimately, something's happening in the background without your permission and without you knowing. Browser exploitation packs specifically, right? So when you look at going back to the discussion of like whatever browser you use, it has its own vulnerability footprint. And so what these browser exploitation packs are going to do is like it's going to say, hey, what version is this person on? What extra what do they call them? Like widgets or goodness, what do you call these things? Apps, downloads, extensions, like whatever you call it for your browser. How many of those do they have? What version are they on? Are any of these out of date? Do any of them have a known vulnerability associated with them? And then it's going to prey upon that, right? And then as you see here, right, like it's going to scan. So a lot of these things will also, like once it fingerprint or takes a look at, analyzes the victim's browser, it's going to look at your system. What operating system are you running? What programs do you have? What out of all of that is vulnerable that I can exploit, right? And then it's going to exploit either your browser or your operating system or any of the programs you have on your computer. And then it's going to go and do it again and again and again, right? That's the ultimate like 4 primary functions there. And you see down here, there's a lot of different programs. This is not even close to an exhaustive list. Don't mind the versions. I'm sure these are probably out of date by now, but you get what I'm saying. Like there's no shortage of tools that can be used for malicious purpose out there. Now, social engineering. Again, preying upon an individual's inherent trusting behavior. So we have influence and manipulation are going to be the 2 major categories there. We're going to talk about what each of the different actions under influence and manipulation. But there's also delivery methods. So I'll talk about those here because I don't think we have a slide specifically. Oh, we do. All right, so let's just get into discussing influence, and then we'll talk about each one of these in depth. So under influence, we have reciprocation, right? That's pretty straightforward. Like, hey, someone does something nice for me, I'm going to do something nice for you and provide you my password, right? Commitment and consistency, like whenever someone has made a decision, they tend to stick by that decision, whether it's right or wrong. Okay. And so, trying to prey upon someone's commitment to their decision or, trying to maybe to sway them in a particular way. And then we have social proof where you're like, hey, what do other people think is correct about this situation? Maybe an example of that is like you see people who do physical pen testing often, like dressing up as a Cisco rep, coming into a building and saying, hey, I'm here to fix something. They're not, white hat, so to speak. And they get into the organization, they're like, hey, I need to log into your computer for a minute. Can you give me access? And people are like, oh, what do you think, Bob? Like, should I do this? And Bob's like, yeah, it's the Cisco rep. Like, what do you think? And then they go and give them access. Liking, right? You're more likely to agree to something if we know and like the person who's making the request. So generally, social engineers will, try and like talk people up and try and get them that inherent trust going, right? Authority, if you will see attacks where people are like, hey, this is the CEO. I need you to give me the financial information right now. I'm in a meeting and I don't have time to mess around. Give me the information now. You see stuff like that often. And then scarcity, right? Whenever people think that they're giving an opportunity or an object that are like hard to get, then they're more willing to give you something for that scarce item. And then we have manipulation. So fixed action patterns are like reflexes, right? To aid in decision making and avoiding the necessary complex interactions. So that's like automatic, almost autonomic function where it's just going to happen. Dual task interference is going to be like, trying to overload a user. Let's say you get, pop-up messages. The first one says, oh, there's an error. Click OK to continue. And then another one pops up and it says, hey, this error wants to download malware. Click OK to continue. You click OK without even reading it, right? Most people don't even read a lot of the pop-up messages that occur. And then hacking the human emotional processor or hacking the amygdala. This is basically causing a visceral emotional response in someone so that you can try and elicit additional information and prey upon that information. Shannon, did you have a question? Gotcha. Okay. I asked because you were unmuted, so I just wanted to double check. Now, media drops. This is also incredibly effective. And so, what a media drop is, let's say you take a USB thumb drive, CD, floppy disk, right? Whatever. It doesn't matter. You load it with malware, and then you go drop it in like a parking lot or a conference room or the cafeteria. It doesn't matter where it is, but just a highly trafficked area. And people love to pick stuff like that up, and they don't even think twice about like plugging it into the computer and trying to use it, right? So that is an instant malware download, kill. Again, it depends on what the end goal of the malicious actor is trying to do, but most of the time it's going to likely be to gain access so that they can steal stuff. But this thing does exist, right? So I want to say Hack5 makes something like this where if you really wanted to, you drop this thing, someone puts it into the computer, and it just fries the computer so that they don't have that computer anymore. So let's talk about phishing and spear phishing. So phishing is going to be that like lame attempt where you get the email that says, hey, I'm a Nigerian prince. If you pay me $500, I'll transfer you like a couple million. Again, like very general, very vague, like people who conduct phishing campaigns will send out millions and millions of these emails, and they're actually like surprisingly effective, and you really don't even need many of them to be effective. If you got like a 1% acceptance rate where people are sending you the money, like you're raking in some cash, right? Spear phishing is going to be targeting. So let's say you craft an email to someone who works in an insurance agency, and says, "Hey, here's a job offer to work at another insurance agency, right? 7, 8 figures because you're such a valued individual." Someone opens that up and then there's malware, right? But it was targeted because the person works at a insurance agency. Maybe the person who's sending the email knew that the person was looking for a new job, and then hit them with the email. Then we have water holing attacks where an attacker will basically take a website and get it to redirect to a malicious site. And so what happens is, let's say, for instance, d2l.arizona.edu becomes infected by the attacker. He redirects out to a website that looks exactly like the D2L website that we use. You go to entering your username and password, and it might work, or it might work because then he passes those credentials back to D2L and then it allows you to log in, or it might just error out and then he collected your credentials, right? So, or potentially installed malware. Again, there's a ton that can happen here, and it's really up to the malware developer's imagination. But water holing, because think about when you think like water hole, a bunch of animals are coming to the water hole, right? So a bunch of users are coming to this website, highly trafficked, and you are redirecting them out to some sort of malicious activity. Now, whaling is going to occur only for high value or high net worth individuals. Okay, it is usually pretty targeted in terms of kind of like spear phishing, where it's not just a, hey, I'm a Nigerian prince, right? Like it's going to be very targeted in terms of like if you're a CEO, let's say maybe you're awaiting some sort of financial document, right? And so the malicious individual knows this, so he sends the CEO, what appears to be the document he's looking for. And usually the executives are the absolute worst about security awareness. And so he, not thinking about checking who it came from, opens it up, and now there's malware, right? So again, but whaling is specifically going to target people who are of high value and high net worth. So network-based attacks. Here, again, we're looking for edge devices where you're trying to do some sort of exploitation because of, in the example of, what was that company? NordVPN, they had some expired cryptographic keys in place. And I think one of the servers leaked that information, if I remember correctly. And so there was a misconfiguration. You also see people using default passwords, right? And so again, you're looking for that edge device to take advantage of and then use that as a way to get into the network. All right, so we're going to shift gears and go to the active cyber defense cycle. Now, the active cyber defense cycle absolutely recognizes that it is not a matter of if you get breached, it's a matter of when. Okay, and really, that's how most companies are going to operate. Like, it is literally impossible to have full security, right? In terms of like, at some point, you're going to have a successful attempt against you, but it comes down to how quickly you can remediate that issue and kick that person out of the network. So let's talk about each one of these, right? So defensible networks, right? One, you got to understand your network. You have to build security in initially. You can't try and do what's called bolt-on security where, security is the afterthought. Like you build the network and you're like, all right, what should we do to make this secure now, right? Like that needs to go into the planning up front to say, hey, we're opening a new branch. Here's the network infrastructure we need. And then let's take a look at how we're going to make sure this is securely added to the current infrastructure that we have. And then we have passive defenses, right? And this is, I would say, somewhat misleading because when you look at passive and you take it at face value, an IPS is an active defense because it goes and blocks, if configured appropriately, any kind of malicious activity. But ultimately, this comes down to selecting the right devices for your network, right? Are you going to use firewalls? Are you going to use segmentation for virtual local area networks on your switches? Broadcast storming. Are you going to turn protection against that on switches? What kind of router protection are you going to use? ACLs, access control lists. You're going to configure your IDS, IPS, or UTM, Unified Threat Management devices appropriately. DLP, data loss prevention. We want to make sure that credit card and social security information or any other type of potentially sensitive information can't leave the network. What are we doing for antivirus and malware solutions? So again, passive defenses in the active cyber defense cycle comes down to making sure you have proper selection of your architecture for the network. And then we have cyber threat intelligence. Now, cyber threat intelligence is absolutely adversary based, right? We're not looking at friendly, we're looking at foe. It's going to be risk focused, process oriented, and tailored for specific consumers. CTI, again, is the analysis, and analysis is predictive behavior of a threat. Okay, so we're looking at, let's say, over the last 6 months, APT5 has been switching their tactics from network-based attacks to file-based exploits, specifically Microsoft Office. Our company uses Microsoft Office. How can we edge against having APT5 come and take advantage of us? That is the value added by cyber threat intelligence. Now, intelligence can operate at the strategic, operational, and tactical level, meaning that like strategic is very when you think like strategic planning, that's like long-term planning. Operational is going to be, kind of that middle ground where maybe it depends on the way the company defines it, but that could be like 6 months to a year, 6 months to 2 years, or maybe even in some cases, up to 6 months and below. And tactical is going to be like day-to-day operations. So again, CTI is not just like one feed or something, like one subscription. Like intelligence is about the analysis of your enemy and being able to predict next steps so that you can protect against where you think the enemy is going to move. And then we have threat hunting. So we switch from threat intelligence where you're super focused on the enemy, and now you're like inward focused for threat hunting. And you're looking at, our network and our systems and looking for what's called indicators of compromise, meaning that there is some anomalous behavior within our own network that needs to be investigated and analyzed to see if a threat has come into the network. And then we have incident response. And incident response is defined by the National Institute of Standards and Technology as the continual cycle of preparation, detection and analysis, containment, eradication, and recovery. Again, because it's predicated on when you get breached, not if you get breached, and then post-incident activity. Okay, again, it's going to happen. If you are interested in incident response, which is a very, very important part of the overall cybersecurity picture, And then there's also a ton of jobs out there for incident response. Then I highly suggest that you read this. Now, not every company is going to implement the NIST 861 verbatim like that. They may have their own spin on the cycle, but understanding all of the work that goes into this is going to give you a good picture of what right looks like. And so, it doesn't really matter if the company you work for follows this verbatim, you know what kind of needs to happen, right? And again, if you go and read this, make sure you can speak intelligently to it and you can put it on your resume. And then here we have threat and environment manipulation. So if we're looking at battlefields, right, this cyber is the only battlefield, so to speak, that you can change your environment and do different things, right? We have things like honey nets or honey pots where it allows you to hang a almost like fake network off of your network that can maybe lure in attackers. And once they get into that network, you can watch them, you can study them and say, hey, what are they trying to get out of this faux network that doesn't have any real information on it? Let's make sure that they don't get into our network by analyzing their tactics, techniques, and procedures and solidifying our network, our personal internal network against what they used. And then, sinkholes are going to be the ability to basically funnel traffic out a port so that it doesn't actually end up causing any damage into the internal network. Spider traps, so there's crawlers that visit websites and analyze the information, and you can send those things into basically a infinite spin, so to speak, so that they're not actually obtaining information on your website. But ultimately, all of this stuff comes down to being able to manipulate your environment on the cyber threat landscape so that you should ideally be in an advantageous position at all times. And if not, then you have the ability to take action and remove threats as quickly as possible. All right, so let's dive into cyber law and policy. And actually, I've kind of gone over a lot, so I'll pause real quick. Does anybody here have any questions, comments, or concerns? Okay. So then I'll keep driving. So the first one we have is the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, originally written in like 1986. Now, this thing was absolute trash as it was written in 86. And what I mean by that is, if you think back to like what did personal computing really look like in 1986, it was nearly non-existent. I like to think of like really the internet starting to explode around like 1990. When people, Bill Gates famously said, I want to put a PC in everybody's house. And really kind of like the 90s was the build out of that. And in 86, like everyone here probably knows already, the government moves like a snail, right? Like super slow. And the pace at which information technology advances is nearly warp speed, right? And so the government could never act that fast. And so when Computer Fraud and Abuse Act was written, it was like, I'm putting this kind of like in a dramatized, like layman term, but like it was like computers can be used for bad. Let's prosecute, right? And it's like initially when they started bringing cases up to like, hey, we're going to process for CFA, people were like, or judges were like, I can't even make use of this. This is so poorly written. I don't even know how to prosecute against this. So all of that to say, it went through multiple revisions. The last one was done in 2008, I think. And, ultimately, like the thing about the CFA is that it talks about any kind of unauthorized access or exceeding your authorized access to a protected computer. And what is a protected computer? Really, they wrote it so broadly still that it could be literally anything. But the three categories for that specifically are going to be government computer, financial institution computer, anything that participates in interstate commerce or international commerce, which if you literally buy something from Amazon, that's interstate commerce. And then the last thing would be voting, right? So if it's like a voting machine, then you can be processed for CFA. So again, it's still written very broadly and has some pretty stiff fines. So ultimately, what it comes down to for CFA is going to be exceeding your authorized access. So if you already have like user permissions and you're trying to do things that are outside your scope of permissions or access, that can be processed for CFA. And then just straight up unauthorized access. So trying to remote into a government computer or financial institution computer or anything that takes place in interstate and international commerce. Economic Espionage Act, pretty straightforward, right? If you use a computer for the benefit of a foreign country or the theft of trade secrets, you can be processed. And that has stiff penalties as well. I think up to like $5 million, if I remember correctly. That's not going to be, the fines aren't on the quiz, but yeah. So basically, it boils down to utilizing it for a foreign actor. The Privacy Act of 1974 ultimately, kind of defines what data can be collected on an individual and providing that, the ability to express your acceptance or trying to redact the information that's being processed or used about you as an individual to other, electronic communication mediums. And then we have the ECPA. This was another law that, when written, was trashed by the government, that failed to really keep up. And actually, if you end up reading Kevin Mitnick's book, Ghost on the Wires, he will talk heavily about ECPA and CFA because those are two acts that the government tried to hit him with when he was on the FBI's top whatever list. And so ECPA specifically is going to protect against electronic wiretapping, but allows internet service providers, I shouldn't say allow, but requires them to install wiretap equipment if a court order is mandated. Okay. And so basically, if law enforcement feels the need to, provide a wiretap to, gain access to your emails or whatever it is, then under the ECPA, internet service providers, as long as there's a court order, has to oblige by that. That'll also feed into one of the next laws that we have here on the next page, called the Cybersecurity Enhancement Act, where if a internet service provider sees traffic from, let's say, from you, that looks like people may be in inherent danger because let's say you're a, mass shooter or something like that, and you're looking up stuff related to that, then, they have the ability to contact law enforcement and let them know. There's also GLBA. That's going to be specifically for financial institutions, right? And basically says they have to have a information security program. Cybersecurity Enhancement Act, we just talked about that one. It allows them to disclose contents of communications to, basically police or government entities if they feel that an emergency is imminent. And then we have the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act, as it was written into this presentation, is no longer intact the way that it was. Elements of the Patriot Act still exist, but the Patriot Act, as it was intended, was designed to deal with acts of terrorism here within the United States. And so ultimately, if there was, probable cause, or, a decent, good faith belief that someone was going to be committing acts of terrorism, then they, again, getting a court order to obtain wiretapping, to seize their communications and verify the danger for that source, was really what the Patriot Act was kind of designed around. Now, the next one, Can-Spam Act, is probably one of the most useless acts out there because it bans or spam from one occurring. Two, it says that everything should have an opt-out medium, but you and I know that if you click a lot of the links in those emails, whether it's opt-out or not, that can take you straight to malware, and so that's kind of a dangerous function there. And then, there's other aspects of the Can-Spam Act, like, banning false or misleading header information, which still happens all the time. Again, one of the most useless acts out there because it's not followed or enforced literally at all. Next, we have the Council of Europe Agreement on Cybercrime. And so this is basically going to be, multiple countries. Think of this as almost like a NATO type of agreement where it's like, hey, we all agree on what cybercrime is and that we want to prosecute it. And if a cybercrime occurs in one of these countries against one of the other countries in the Council of Europe Agreement on Cybercrime, then we will process and investigate accordingly. We also have GDPR. So GDPR is wide-reaching. It is huge and replaced the EU DPD or Data Protective Directive back in 2018. If you recall, back prior to 2018, every website that you visited did not have that stupid banner that would come up and say, hey, do you accept the cookies for this website or do you reject them? That's a GDPR thing. And so, GDPR is incredibly complex. It's really focused on privacy. And here in the United States, we have tried to enact something similar, specifically for California. It's called the CCPA or California Consumer Privacy Act. That was spawned due to GDPR. And again, it's all about protecting the privacy of its citizens. And so, again, super complex, but just know that GDPR is focused around privacy and that it is wide-reaching and has very, very stiff penalties for infringing upon privacy. Then we have restricted content laws. So China would be like a good example of this, where they say that, like, hey, our citizens cannot view certain types of material. Kind of the workaround there is like if you use a VPN, then you can usually get around a lot of the restricted content. So then we have Title 10, which is going to dictate cyber operations for the military. And ultimately, Title 10 is dedicated to, like, if we need to do cyber operations against a foreign country, then this is the governing document for that. Title 50 is going to be governing civilian agencies like the National Security Agency and what the NSA, CIA, what those agencies can do in terms of cyber operation. We have Title 32 that's going to specifically apply to the National Guard. However, depending on how the National Guard is activated, they may also fall under Title 10 for military or Title 50 for civilian agency, depending on, again, how they're employed. We have Title 18, crimes and criminal procedure. A lot of this is going to be defining out, like, what is cybercrime and what is a computer, what is access, right? All of this stuff. And then the last thing that we have is the NDAA Section 954, which governs armed conflict and clandestine operations, which ultimately has, the layman way to put this is basically like, hey, the Department of Defense can carry out any action that the president authorizes. And so, whether that's going to be disclosed to the public or not, the 2011, 2012 NDAA is going to kind of govern that. And it could fall under Title 50, it could fall under Title 10, again, who's carrying out the action, but ultimately, silent operations happen. And with that concludes our lecture for this week, as well as this class, really. So I'll pause for any last minute questions, comments, or concerns before we depart.
Yes, for the final exam, it can mostly be done with all of the PowerPoints, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's all I wanted to ask.
You sound super clear on that one. So whatever you did to your microphone. Oh, was that Ashton?
That was me. Yeah, that was me.
Oh, okay. All right. Sorry, I thought it was Shannon. Shannon was also unmuted, and I was like, that for your microphones. Okay. All right. Any other questions, comments, concerns?
Professor, what are your office hours for this week?
Just shoot me an email. I'll set up, if you want to do a one-on-one. I don't have any set office hours, but I'll get something scheduled with you if you want them.
Okay, that works.
Sounds good. All right, guys. Well, hey, happy holidays. I hope you have a great week. Good luck on the exam for this week, as well as the program assessment quiz and the final. If you have any issues whatsoever, please let me know. And the last thing I want to make sure that you guys know is, like, if you need feel free to always reach out to me, even if you don't have a class with me. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, share any insight that I may have, or about any questions that you may have, as well as letters of recommendation. If you need those, feel free to shoot me an email. And I'm not necessarily the fastest person in the world, but I will get you what you need before the deadline. Okay. So again, good luck out there. Let me know if you need anything, and best of luck to you all. Happy holidays, guys.
Thank you. Happy holidays.
Thank you.